New evidence has been found in an update to Secret of the Mimic that may help us finally answer a question I asked a few weeks ago. And aside from that, even more evidence points us towards the recanonization of one of the most important FNaF stories ever written. I'm Demuted, make sure you subscribe, and let's get started. Okay, so to quickly fill you in on what's been happening as of late, on September 16th of 2025, Steel Wool put out an update for Secret of the Mimic. This update, despite no real hype or cause to pay attention, ended up being pretty massive. For example, jump scares no longer take place in a pitch black void, which was among the larger complaints about this game from a quality standpoint, but something new was added to the game that many theorists have been discussing. In a post from Hyperdroid, he mentions this window which connects to the warehouse and can be seen from the security office. Originally, this was just a window. However, in the updated version of the game, you can now see a silhouetted figure moving back and forth in the distance. While many were quick to say that this is the Digityper, which can be found in that very room when you go there, not only does he not move like the silhouette does, he ends up being destroyed after the Jackie encounter. But this figure can be seen there the entire game. So if it's not the Digityper, who is it? Well, it's hard to make any immediate calls, but I and many others were immediately drawn to one name. Edwin. Out of everyone we hear mentioned in this game, the only person who would theoretically still be lingering around the factory would be Edwin. M1 is an F10N4, M2 is the Mimic, and all of Edwin's employees have gone away, with many of them working for Fazbear in the future. So really, it only makes sense for this mysterious figure to be Edwin. There is another possibility that I haven't ruled out though, that being that this is actually a spirit. If that's the case, it could be Fiona even. However, if this is true, I have to ask, what does this add to the story? It tells us that her spirit is lingering around, which is cool, but in my opinion, it's not really enough to justify adding this new asset into the game. We've seen Steel Wool alter game aspects before when fans either pick up on something unintended or they don't pick up on something at all. In this case, I think it might be Steel Wool telling us that Edwin lived, because a large amount of the fanbase believed that he had died. But I wouldn't put much stake into this being the answer if there wasn't more proof. What I'm going to tell you now might sound strange or even like a bug, but it's something I believe stems from Secret of the Mimic's tension mechanic. I should also emphasize that what I'm going to be talking about did not happen to me personally. This is something I read from a player on Twitter. After completing the dolly section of the game, they went to leave via the elevator, only it didn't work right away. They heard Fiona's voice giving the command to open the hatch and giving instructions, before eventually being able to move on, as if they were being halted because Fiona was instructing someone else. This user wasn't sure if this was a bug, but I believe it's part of the tension mechanic. And if this is true, then I think it shows that there is someone else there with us, moving throughout the factory, maybe even following us and keeping tabs. And who could that be? Edwin. But what's important to note is that this experience apparently happened before the patch, meaning that although it could indicate we're being followed, it doesn't necessarily directly correlate to the mysterious silhouette. In my opinion, I think we're dealing with a genuine FNaF Ratman, a character whose fate is ambiguous, but who's definitely still around in some capacity, either living or dead. And if you've made it this far into the video, let me introduce you to Gamersupps. That's right, your boy got that partnership, and now you can support me with your regular Gamersupps purchase by going to gamersupps.gg and using the code DEMUTED for 10% off your order, or by clicking the link in the pinned comment down below. Really excited to be supported by Gamersupps. I'm sure many of you know from me leaving my coffee sips in past videos that I need a caffeine kick pretty often, and Gamersupps has been my preferred way to do it. I recommend this product very highly, and it's the new best way to support me to ensure I can keep making these videos. Also be sure to try their sleep support products. These have also been great at making sure I get the sleep I need every night, which is a lot. I sleep a lot. Also, during the editing process of this video, I was made aware that Gamersupps GG Premium Energy canned energy drinks are coming back. In fact, by the time this video is up, they've already been restocked, so use that code and go get them now. So now, let's get back to the theories. Let's move on to the second part of this video, the one where I discuss a detail hidden in plain sight that for the life of me, I haven't seen anyone bring up online. But I also don't watch many other theorists, so stop me if you've heard this one before. The storyteller. Please don't click off. Yes, well, I know we're all sick of hearing about this thing since the books have been thrown into questionable continuity, and that's if we're being generous and saying that they're still mostly true. But what if I told you we actually see the storyteller in Secret of the Mimic itself? I know, that's a big claim, but once I explain, I'm sure you'll understand why I think this. For those who don't know, one of the endings to Secret of the Mimic has you enter David's bedroom, which has this mural on the wall with different animals. There's also this book, but you can't activate it right away. In order to activate it and start the ending of this game, you have to put the white tiger plush on top. This makes the storybook sequence start, and your job now is to correctly tell the story to the Mimic by pressing these buttons in correlation to the wall mural. The sequence is randomized, but ultimately not difficult, and finishing the book has the Mimic, now locked into the David personality, scoop up the white tiger plush and go to bed. But what I find so strange is that this storybook pillar isn't mentioned anywhere else in the game. It's just there, and contains what seems to be a recording of Edwin and M1. Further, M1 guides you here through moon.exe, but never tells you about this device at all. Even when you meet them in F10 and 4, she never says go to David's bedroom. So what's going on here? Well, I believe that this device is the storyteller, or at least a primitive version of it. Think about it. The storyteller in-game and in the books are machines designed to, well, tell stories, and both only function with the white tiger placed on top. And if we take this story to be randomized in-universe rather than a recording, that would also indicate a similarity with the storyteller. That's why I think there are buttons for you to press. It's meant to be an interactive experience for David specifically when Edwin can't be around. I imagine that M1 goes to put David to bed and they play with the book. The only thing that points to it not being entirely randomized in-universe to me is the wall mural being the code, as that tells us it's not entirely randomized, but there is a predetermined series of events. But that's not the strongest evidence in my opinion. The story itself was very clearly written to work in virtually any order, so I think it's possible M1 just changed this mural routinely to help David guess the story. It just makes more sense to me that the story is semi-random, generated from different pre-written parts rather than simply always having been this way. I mean, that's literally how it works for the player of the game. So if this is indeed meant to be an older version of the storyteller, what does that mean? Well, for one, it means that some version of this story is indeed canon. We have the device described in it right there. And while that doesn't mean that the story itself is canon yet, I think it makes it much more likely now that we have this piece to work with. It also means that very likely M2 is not glitchtrap. Let me explain. In the storyteller, we learn that this is the device used to corrupt and change the personalities of all of the animatronics in the Pizzaplex, as they're essentially being fed new routines by the storyteller that is changing them to be corrupted versions of themselves. Monty is more aggressive, Roxy is more selfish, Chica is more gluttonous, and Freddy is somehow even more gay. Anyway, when Edwin looks into the storyteller, he finds out it's running his old code, Mimic 1, which theorists believe would be the full name of M1. I mean, really, what else would it even be? Murray 1, I guess? Regardless, we see the storyteller do the exact same thing to the Mimic at MCM, locking the Mimic into a specific personality after being exposed to its generated story. This already implies that if the storyteller is indeed how the Gamersupps were taken over at the Pizzaplex, then it can't be the Mimic doing it, because they're susceptible to the exact same machine. However, it makes a lot more sense for it to be M1 doing this, not just because of Mimic 1 in the books, but because we know they had a hand in the creation of these stories in the first place. I know the comfy theory right now is that M1 is the nice Mimic and M2 is the evil Mimic, but when we look at how they behave, I think M1 is a day one manipulator, and between the two, I stand by them being the more likely glitchtrap suspect. For some reason, people seem to forget that if you just do what M1 tells you to do through Dispatch's voice, you still end up dead. So very clearly, they aren't a trustworthy character. But what I find most interesting about this is that if I'm right about this being the storyteller, Ruin's Mimic suddenly makes more sense. If the Mimic is susceptible to the same personality locking that the Gamersupps are, then it makes sense that it would be resistant to that happening. It wants to kill us in this ending, but we're fending it off using the storyteller. M2 is a misbehaving child. One that misbehaves so badly that after it rips the device out of its chest without we can plug into, Glitchtrap has Vanny and Gregory seal them up. That's why Gregory's bag is down there in ruin. I don't think he came back, he was just there before security breach even happened. And I know that's a lot to throw at you, but I'm hoping that you can see it from my eyes. This one single device can tell us so much about the modern story of FNaF. Even if you don't believe the events of the books to be true, I think you should ask yourself, what is this device? Let's backtrack a bit. Earlier when I was talking about the Shadow Man that is likely Edwin but could also be a spirit, I mentioned that it could be Fiona. And I have to admit, I don't think that's really true. And the reason for that is because I think we have a different candidate for Fiona's spirit. As I mentioned earlier, the storyteller only works when it has the white tiger plush placed on the pedestal, and in the books it works when the white tiger head is placed there. So somehow White Tiger is connected to M1/Mimic1 and is tied to the corruption of the animatronics and security breach, something that doesn't really make sense if we assume that it's David's spirit haunting MCM, separate from the Mimic. And while I still believe White Tiger is a spirit, I think it's not David's spirit. Something we learned about Fiona relatively late into the game is that she created this Roxy puppet for David's birthday. In fact, throughout the game we find various birthday gifts he's received over the years. Among these is of course the White Tiger plush. And since Fiona made the Roxy puppet, it's not unheard of that she also created the Tiger plush. After all, she was a character designer and created puppets on her own, separate from Edwin. So if that's the case, White Tiger doesn't just mean something special to David, it means something special to Fiona. It's her gift to her son, and her son's favorite toy moving forward. Then of course, Fiona dies. Edwin has created a new robot to mimic what it sees. Based on tapes we hear in the basement, I don't think Edwin created the mimic with the intent to immediately copy his dead wife. I think that this is a consequence of him building it in the basement.
This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Say something! It's me, Edwin! Over.
The basement is where we encounter White Tiger, who teleports around and follows us through the dark. Down here, Edwin also records himself doing an EVP session, since he's heard Fiona's voice. And what I think he hears is the mimic replicating Fiona's voice, because it also heard her down here. M1 takes on Fiona's personality because it's interacting with and learning from her ghost in the basement. So why then is Fiona the White Tiger? I think it's because she wants to reconnect to her son. Based on M1's personality, we know that she cared for David even more than she cared for Edwin. So in order to reach out to her child, maybe she reached out as something they both shared, the White Tiger. This would then explain why M1 keeps being subtly tied into it. And personally speaking, I think it makes more sense for White Tiger to be Fiona than for it to be David, as this would explain the sounds Edwin heard in the basement. They were either real and coming from the White Tiger, or fake and coming from the Mimic, who would at the time be mimicking Fiona and building up its personality to be her, because otherwise we don't really have an explanation for how the Mimic adopted the Fiona personality. As far as we know, it never met the real Fiona when she was alive, and although you could say she learned Fiona's personality based on recordings, that would make Fiona the only person the Mimic imitates that they had never met before. Personally speaking, I think it makes more sense for M1 to learn off of interaction rather than just archival data, but that's just my opinion. And since the script is running a little bit short, I'm just going to use the rest of the time to talk about Burntrap. Now, one of the biggest reasons people have argued with me on M1 being glitchtrap is because that would most likely mean that they would also be Burntrap, and that would mean that the Mimic itself isn't Burntrap. But in fact, I feel that this is just a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. Yes, I did believe for a very long time that the Mimic was Burntrap, but the evidence is telling me otherwise now. I think that the Mimic and Burntrap are two separate entities, and Burntrap has a very specific purpose in Security Breach. But first, I'm gonna rip the band-aid off and just say it, we cannot use visual design as a way to state objectively who is who across these three designs. These two robots are meant to be the same character and have almost nothing in common, a real Ship of Theseus thing. And since that is the case, technically yes, the Mimic could still be Burntrap. However, one thing we can say separates Burntrap from the other Mimics is this. Burntrap uses a charging pod. Neither the Mimic nor the Ruin Mimic are ever shown to use one of these, and it may be because Burntrap consists of Glamrock endo parts which are still visible on his model, so it definitely would imply to some degree that Burntrap uses a Glamrock endoskeleton as a base in comparison to the Mimic. This lines up with some of the earliest evidence we had in Security Breach that implied parts were going missing or even being stolen. Perhaps Vanny, or even Gregory, was stealing these parts in an effort to create Burntrap, modifying Afton's remains to be puppeted by Glitchtrap. And I say Afton's remains because otherwise we don't really know whose body this would be. Edwin's, Mr. Burroughs, one of the teens from the epilogues. It's hard to say, but I personally believe that Burntrap was created to give Glitchtrap a tangible form, one it could use to watch over the Mimic and prevent it from escaping, or prevent anyone from getting to it. In any case, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.